Well, this video is going to suck to make. Alright everybody, I like Kirby, you like Kirby, let's not beat around the bush here. You came here for Kirby, or more specifically, Kirby enemies. Cause man, does this game have some wild enemies. You're probably thinking by looking at the title, this dude totally copied the other dude who made the Goomba video, and yeah, you're totally right. Don't worry though, I'll put my own spin on it. I haven't actually seen the Goomba video yet, so it's gonna be really different, hopefully. Anyway, shout out to the dude who made the video, and yeah, go follow him, I guess. He gave me this idea. It's not like he needs a shout out anyway, it's like 5 people at most are gonna watch this video, so yeah. I was thinking though, Kirby has a lot of games. With those games comes enemies. Some cool ones, some weird ones, and yeah. I mean, Kirby does have a track record for being really weird, especially in bosses, but I don't think the enemies get enough credit. So I wanted to do a deep dive and analyze the enemies in every single Kirby game ever. Well, not really actually. It's gonna go up to Star Allies because I haven't played any of the games after that, so yeah, sorry about that. I'd play them if I could, trust me. Anyway, I'll be looking at the games, not in the order that they're released in, but in the era they came out. Era being console, by the way. And at the end of every system generation, I'll do an analysis for that era. I'll talk about the trends I noticed in the enemies and the changes and stuff. Cool? Cool. Okay, I don't think I've done a long and extravagant intro in a while, so editor, make me a long and extravagant intro. That editor is me, by the way. I'm making the intro. I actually really hate it. It takes a while, but it's fun.
Turn my headphones up. Yeah. Check. Yeah. Now, how Matt whole heat like Clint Eastwood's reborn. Leave her with more holes than a dartboard. Haters watch him in the seat, double shot and drink like the answer to the problems that the bottle's bottom. From the bottom top that homie pay how you owe me. My niggas take no like Kobe. Even with the arms of the hawk, you couldn't hold me from getting mine. So as we roll, smoking and getting by. Thanks rap, I ain't got a dime. Got me sneaking out of checkout lines with bottles by the wayside. Smack them in the face, let them taste pride. Fakes try, end up washed up like the shorelines. Do or die, ride how the table turn, street terms. Keep me in this dirt like an earthworm. Woody spit hits and burns where brothers ever learn. Word for word, champ with a nerve, meeting adjourned.
I know the intro was short, but I have a 35-page script to read. I have a lot on my plate right now. Okay, anyway, this is a Game Boy if you didn't know. And this is Kirby's Dreamland. If you put them together, you get this game. It's pretty good. Something introduced in this pretty good game is a Waddle Dee. Basically, the Goomba of Kirby. They're relatively harmless, and honestly, I don't know why Kirby kills them. He must have some reasons though. Waddle Dees are probably the least notable enemies in this game though. Ever heard of a Peaser before? Of course, everybody loves Peaser. God, just saying that name makes me feel wrong. No wonder why this thing never came back. Oh look, Tookie and Twizzy made their first appearances here. I'm sure at least 2 of you remember those guys. I always felt bad for killing the Twizzies. They were literally just born. Let's just say though, this game has a lot of enemies that reappear occasionally, only to stop appearing during the DS era and never come back. But even then, the very beginning, this game set the foundation for some iconic enemies. The Gordos, Sir Kibble, Scarfies, and even Poppy Bros Jr. Plus the bosses here are iconic too. Chad Wispy Woods, Kracko, and King Dedede, baby! I love this man right here. Best boss in the series. So far, at least. Okay, on to Kirby's Dreamland 2. One of my favorites. Surprisingly, this game has 10 less enemies than the first game, but it gets rid of a lot of filler enemies from that game. Now that we finally have copy abilities, these guys can truly get wild. First, we have the iconic Blade enemy who only appears in this game. But he does give the sword copy ability, so that's cool. Honestly, the enemies in this game are way more oriented on copy abilities. Rocky, Sparky, and Floaty the Drifter, who actually appears in the anime for some reason, despite this being the only game he ever appears in. Okay, what the hell? Who on the animation team decided to pull out a random enemy from Dreamland 2 that nobody remembers or cares about? He just appears in a random Kirby game, leaves for 7 years, only to make a cameo in a random Kirby episode, then leaves again, refuses to elaborate. We also get the iconic Icicle enemy, which isn't even really an enemy, more so just an obstacle. But hey, it's classified as an enemy, so I'll call it one. It gets a lot of love from the devs too, given the fact that it's even in the newest game. Must be unfair to the enemies that aren't just inanimate objects. Okay, no, but let's talk about the bosses real quick. These guys are insane. Wispy Woods looks like he just caught a lethal. Am I still allowed to say that on YouTube? Does YouTube still censor that word? Okay, yeah, I'll censor it for safe measure, just in case. We have Nelly and Nuruff, who barely ever appear again. Actually, no, Nuruff appears quite a few times. It's just Nelly that gets shafted. Except they both appear in the Kirby anime. Okay, what the hell? We have this guy named Sweet Stuff for some reason, and he probably gave some kids nightmares. And last but not least, we have King Dedede. Again, man, this fight is amazing, and it's a huge step up from the last. It's so odd, and it perfectly encapsulates the energy in this game. Wait, what? Okay, so apparently we have this dude in this game. It's the debut of Dark Matter, and boy is it great. It's so odd, I love it. Why'd I say boy? That's not even in my vocabulary. I don't know why I said that. Okay, whatever, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. What does matter is Dark Matter, and man, he brings such an eerie presence to this game. This dude just attacked Popstar because he had no friends and was jealous. Oh yeah, the Dark Matter trilogy begins here if you didn't know. Most people don't even know the series has arcs, but you know, whatever. Not everyone is a loser, so good on you, viewer, if you didn't know what that was. I sure know what it was. Okay, that's the last mainline Kirby game for the Game Boy, so let's move on to the spin-offs. How do they use the enemies here? Let's find out. Kirby's Pinball Land. Most regular enemies are made to fit in this sort of pinball setting. They add some new stuff too, like Hatch Duck, which appears in this one and actually comes back a few other times. It's basically just the Twizzy enemy from the first game. We also have bosses made to fit the pinball gameplay too. Their attack patterns are barely even changed. The only difference is that it's sort of vertical now. Oh, and as always, for this era, King Dedede is the final boss, but he also shoots electricity from his hands for some reason. Amazing. 10 out of 10. Kirby's Block Ball, a game we all forget exists. Again, it mostly uses enemies from the mainline game tier, except it adjusts their movement for vertical gameplay. It also really likes to use flying enemies like Bronto Burt. Ridiculous name, I know. The only new enemy I came across was Blasto, which he looks very stupid. Copy abilities are in this game too, so I know the devs had this in mind when adding the enemies in this game. And as always, bosses are abundant here, but they just sort of walk around while you're stuck in this vertical angle. It's actually kind of infuriating. Like, you guys get to walk around in a 3D plane while I'm stuck doing this stupid block ball stuff. I like the inclusion of bosses though, that's always a plus. Dedede is a final boss as always, but it's inferior to Pinball Land. 6 out of 10. Kirby Star Stacker. There's two versions of this game, but I'm going to be talking about the Game Boy iteration first. There are hardly any enemies in this game. Actually, does this game even have enemies? I guess this hand that kind of screws you over occasionally. Okay, yeah, no, there's literally nothing here. Yeah, I know this is a Game Boy Color game, but I don't feel like having to abruptly go to this for a system with only one Kirby game, so I'm just gonna lump it in with the others for a quick second. This game has very different gameplay compared to the others, so it obviously designed the enemies in mind for this. Instead of moving left and right, they move up or down and left and right. Truly revolutionary. Enemies aren't even abundant in this game. In fact, they're barely even obstacles. I guess we have Blockbot, a super lame enemy that is extremely slow and hardly does anything. Enemies are pretty present in the flying stages though, which is pretty cool. We have a new enemy called the Cloud Cannon, which is actually really cool, but it never appears again for some reason. Oh yeah, and again, there are bosses, you know, as always. But now you actually have an equal playing field, since both of you guys can move both vertically and horizontally. There's so much more emphasis on dodging quick attacks than in the other spin-offs. And really, what would this game be if King Dedede wasn't the final boss? A fitting end for a crazy era. Okay, with the end of an era comes an analysis. This was a very odd time for Kirby. It laid out the seeds for some iconic enemies, but it also had some guys that most people wouldn't recognize. It more so laid out the foundations for the future, and despite how experimental some of the gameplay was at the time, not much changed if I'm being honest. Compared to the later games, it feels sort of quaint actually. Okay, now on to the NES era. Kirby's Adventure, an absolute game changer for the series. So many iconic enemies here. UFO, Blade Knight, Bomber, and with the new mechanic that is the copy ability, it gives them so much more importance. Before, they kind of felt like an afterthought, but now, I openly seek them out. With the new enemies and copy abilities, the devs made sure to create environments to accommodate them, like adding wheelies to sloped areas, and due to the new hardware, a lot more enemies can be on screen at once. This allows for some really cool interactions, even if they can get really annoying at times. You'll often see enemies in pairs now, and it really makes the world feel more alive. Bosses here are awesome too, and we also get Meta Knight's debut, as well as Mr. Shine and Mr. Bright, who appear in a lot of the later Game Boy games. Let's not forget Nightmare either, who is awesome. As far as I know, his inclusion served no purpose towards the Dark Matter trilogy. I mean, he was introduced before Dark Matter, so I don't really blame him. He's one of the few earlier villains though, whose lore doesn't tie back to Dark Matter in some sort of way. In fact, in terms of lore, he's probably even less important than Dark Nebula, which being upstaged by Dark Nebula is not a good look. I would not take that, honestly. But really, who cares? He looks cool and has an awesome fight. Amazing. Given the fact it's only one game, I kinda already said what I wanted to say. It introduced the largest amount of iconic enemies so far. What can I say? Okay, on to the SNES games, and there will be quite a few of these. Kirby Superstar, one of the best games on the system, and they give Kirby enemies so much more to do here. They're not always opponents you have to kill. Sometimes you'll be competing against them in a quick draw match, or beating them in a Megaton Punch Championship. Even better is that you can befriend a lot of them too. They have so many cool new powers and moves, but there is some weird stuff in this game. Like, at the end of one of the campaigns, a crowd of Waddle Dees is shown cheering for you. This isn't the first time it's happened, by the way. It's just a thing I noticed, really. And it happens even more later on in the new games. I always thought of the Waddle Dees as kind of King Dedede's minions, so it's kind of weird to see them rooting for Kirby. I guess they've kind of become their own thing now, you know, the longer the games go on. Anyway, a lot of iconic enemies make their debuts here. Simir and his amazing mirror copy ability, Burning Leo, who is really well known despite being in only 4 games, and Bounder, who was here before, but kinda sorta makes their last appearance in this game. He was used a lot in Pinball and Block Ball, due to his tendency to climb on walls, making him a good obstacle for those games. But he wasn't really needed that much anymore, honestly. It's kind of a niche role to fill in those games. Oh, and I cannot forget the bosses. The bosses here are probably some of the best in the entire series. Fighting King Dedede in a stadium, Dynablade, this RPG boss thingy that I love wholeheartedly, and freaking Marks. I mean, who could forget Marks, the most iconic boss in the entire series. Dude has some crazy lore too. Apparently the only thing keeping him friendly in the newer games is the fact that he's well fed. That's actually horrifying. Even then, I guess Dream Friends and Star Allies aren't really canon, but it's still kind of scary. They could do a lot with him in the future, given the fact that he's canonically still alive. But enough of that, let's go on to Kirby's Dreamland 3. The second game in the Dark Matter trilogy, and honestly, it's more of the same really, except some of the enemies are spooky now. Look at this Wispy Woods, it's so scary, man. This game doesn't really change that much, but it has some neat stuff in it, I won't lie. These Waddle Dees and their little rowboats, they hardly have an effect on the game, but they're just so cool, I love them. But this game just has a ton of throwaway enemies that never appear again, and I'm not even gonna mention them here because they're not even worth mentioning. Like, they're the worst designs in the series so far. It feels like the devs were going through a time where they had immense trouble coming up with enemy ideas, because some of these guys are super lame. Like Joe, his name's just Joe. And he appears in the anime, god damn it. No, he's literally just a shark, I'm not even joking. He's a literal shark, they just called him Joe. Bosses are also kind of downgraded here. Sorry to sound like a hater, but this game is a step down in terms of enemies, if I'm being honest. We do get some cool references to past bosses in Avalanche's boss fight. I also really like Pawn and Con for some reason. It's cool that they came back in later games, even if they're just kind of like the second copycat of Lololo and La, the first copycat being Nuruff and Nelly. But let's not forget, Lololo and La aren't even technically Kirby enemies. They actually predate Kirby and have a game of their own. Anyway, we also get some really cool game over screens for bosses. I love them a lot. But let's not forget the best game over screen and the best boss in the game. Zero. Dark Matter had a way bigger presence in this game than the last one in the Dark Matter trilogy. In 2, you could go the entire time without knowing that Dark Matter even exists. But now, the Dark Matter is just possessing everybody, left and right. But even then, there is something that new players may miss, and that is Zero. It's an amazing fight too, and he has some crazy lore. He's basically a leader of a certain section of Dark Matter, and he's able to control them at will. He's not even really supposed to be fighting Kirby. It's just the fact that Kirby is such a huge threat to him. He decided to take matters into his own hands, and the battle that you have with him is basically a last-ditch effort for him to maintain his power. Disappointing in the bosses department, but introduced a lot of cool themes here. It's probably the weakest one, but it more so sets the foundation for the finale, rather than being its own thing. Anyway, let's go on to spin-offs now. Kirby's Dream Course. We're in a sort of 3D plane again, but enemies don't really move this time. In fact, you're actually supposed to hit them. Except for Gordos, they do move, and they're also the main obstacle. We also have a few wispy woods scattered around the course, and for the final boss, we have Mecha Dedede, who is awesome. The Chibi Dededes also make their first appearance here, and they never come back. Wow. Rest in peace, Chibi Dededes. Kirby's Avalanche. What an odd game. There aren't really enemies here. They're more so opponents you go against when playing, and they of course vary in difficulty. Waddle Dee being the easiest, and naturally, King Dedede being the hardest, as it should be. We also have Heavy Mole in this game for some reason. He was a boss in Kirby's Adventure and never came back until this game. Also, I need to mention that they talk in this game, by the way. It is super weird. They have the worst smack talk I've ever heard too, and Kirby is an absolute menace in this game. Just make it stop, please. Kirby Star Stacker. Again, the SNES version has more to it this time. Just like Avalanche, the enemies are more so just opponents you face when playing. And thankfully, they don't talk this time either. Grill, if that's how you even pronounce it, makes her first and only major appearance in this game. We also get Meta Knight in this game, who hasn't appeared in many spin-offs so far, so that's awesome to see. Anyway, on to the next. Kirby's Toybox, a weird Super Famicom Kirby game. This game doesn't even have enemies in it. How lame. It does have King Dedede though, but it's also really lame. He just throws hammers. An absolute travesty right here. Yeah, no, we're done with this era. So far, the best and most experimental era so far. Kirby Superstar really set the tone for this era, but it kinda got weirder over time. Honestly, it kinda felt like they were throwing stuff at the wall. Obviously not a lot stuck though. Dreamland 3 is a prime example of this. I mean, having weird gimmick enemies is one thing, but making them talk is a whole other box of worms I don't want to get into. Superstar set the stage for quality, but after that, they just kinda dropped the ball in my opinion. Superstar carries. Anyway, on to the N64 games, or game I guess. This is the last game in the Dark Matter trilogy, and man, is it fantastic. Enemy placement is more situational here than ever, given the fact that some areas are locked out without certain abilities. You can also combine abilities here, and the game places certain enemies in certain places to accommodate for that. But just like Dreamland 3, this game has some odd enemies like, yeah, no, let's just go on. A lot of the enemies here are oddly situational and they don't really stand out that much. Don't get me wrong though, they're not as bad as the ones in Dreamland 3. Oh yeah, by the way, Nerf makes an appearance here, finally, without Nelly this time though, sadly. But despite the updated graphics, not much has changed in general. The enemies still operate like how they used to. But due to the semi-3D plane, sometimes enemies will come out of the background. The game is much slower paced in general though, so the enemies are much slower too. Gone is the fast-paced action of Superstar. Despite the enemies not really utilizing the 3D plane though, the bosses certainly do. Wispy Woods, whose boss fight works entirely in 3D. Adeline, who we fight again, but becomes our friend this time. King Dedede, as always, why even mention him? I do it every single time. Well, this is where I tell you that it's crucial to mention him, because he actually helps us this time. This is a nice change of pace, especially considering the fact that in the future, he's gonna do this a lot. Oh yeah, and let's not forget Zero 2, an amazing final boss for the Dark Matter trilogy. I know some kid was absolutely traumatized by this guy when they first played it. Well, that's if they even saw him, because unlocking him is really hard for some reason. I don't know why they make it so hard, it's so annoying. But yeah, the boss fight is great, and it's kind of tragic actually. It plays less as a Kirby game, and more like a shooter, kind of like Star Fox, but I've never played Star Fox, so I'm just gonna call it Star Fox though. The fight isn't really hard, but it's probably the most unique fight in the series. And I don't just mean gameplay wise, I mean lore wise too. I mean, his lore is like kind of crazy when you think about it. Through my research for this video, this guy was the hardest to find information about. What Zero 2 isn't exactly clear. Some say he's a reincarnated Zero, others believe he's an entirely new entity in itself. There's not an abundant amount of info on him, and honestly, I could make my own separate video on this because it's kind of crazy. But we gotta finish this video first, so let's go into the analysis. What do you want me to say? It's literally one game. It's nothing crazy or anything. Compared to the other franchises that did their jumps to 3D, this is kind of unceremonious. Despite that, it's still really cool to see these guys in 3D. Even if they don't use this new dimension to their benefit all that much, it did lay out the foundations for 3D enemy designs in the future though, so that's cool, as always. And I can certainly say, utilize 3D more than some of the other future 3D Kirby games. Okay, now on to the Game Boy Advance. Going back to 2D this time. Ah, what a game. In my opinion, it's inferior to Adventure, but I'll talk about it since it's a bit different in terms of enemies. I mean, with the smaller screen, enemies behave slightly more different than the ones in the NES game. Nothing too noticeable, but it's slightly different. The biggest thing I would note is the fact that Meta Knight is playable now. We've been having a lot of previous antagonists become playable now. We may take it for granted nowadays, but playing as Meta Knight or King Dedede back then was groundbreaking. Oh yeah, and this game brings back a few new enemies that haven't been seen since the original game, which is really cool. Like Cool Spook, for example. His name's Cool Spook. Yeah, these Kirby names are really killing me here. The devs also added a new one called Gip. It's just a pig with wings. Very clever, Hal. Nothing too crazy here though, just more of the same really. Looks like we're entering another dry era for Kirby, because these enemies are not really changing all that much. Compared to the other games, this game has much more open-ended gameplay, but it doesn't really change the enemies all that much. I mean, I guess they're more crammed together now, because the spaces are a lot smaller. We also get a ton of weird enemies here that never come back. We do get Shadow Kirby here though, and he's iconic, let me be honest. It's just so odd though, not Shadow Kirby, but like the enemies in general, like, they just don't come back, they're so random and weird, and like, what were they thinking? The designs aren't fitting for the series, and even worse is that they're not memorable, so what does that make them? It just makes for boring enemies. I'm gonna call this the Dreamland 3 curse. This doesn't exclude the bosses, by the way, because they're really odd too. We get a new variation of Wispy Woods that isn't actually Wispy Woods. He's now King Gollum. Fantastic. Molly makes his first appearance here, I guess. I don't know if you guys care at all. I don't. Master Hand and Crazy. Okay, what the hell? Master Hand and Crazy Hand are in this game? What is this, Smash Bros? They give a cool ass copy ability too. I can vouch for them in this game, honestly. And there's Dark Meta Knight in this game too, or Mirror Meta Knight. I don't know, this is getting ridiculous. Why are these guys so weird? And there's no King Dedede. This is a huge sin right here. What are you thinking? Ignoring that absolute crime though, Dark Mind is the final boss, and he kind of looks like Nightmare actually, and then Zero later in his final form. As far as I know though, he has no association with either of them. Okay, and the final phase of his boss fight is a top-down shooter. What is up with this game? Okay, I lied about this being a dry era for Kirby. I take it back. This game is absolute insanity. This is too weird for me to handle, man. It's simultaneously unremarkable in terms of enemies and absolutely wild at the same time. It's a goddamn paradox right here. Okay, just take me to the next game, please. Dude, why am I even talking about this one? There are literally no enemies to speak of here. You just slide these panels around, it's a waste of time. Just go on to the analysis already, jeez. Another weird and lackluster era for Kirby enemies. I was kinda surprised by how oddly empty this era felt. I'm not a hater of these games, by the way. I mean, to be honest, this is like my 2 least favorite Kirby games, but I still like them, I still play them. But if I'm being real, no King Dedede and Amazing Mirror is one thing, but the lack of new enemies really threw me off. It does make sense though, since they did have to resprite everything for the new visuals. I can't really understand the new enemies though and why they look so bad, but it's besides the point, let's move on. Now onto the one and only GameCube game. I guess you could count the other Kirbys as opponents, given the fact that you're going against them. There are still traditional enemies in this game though, and the devs made sure to allow them to fit in this 3D environment. They kinda took the Mario Kart approach, where they're kinda like stage obstacles, except they're more important than the ones in Mario Kart for one reason. These guys give you copy abilities, and copy abilities are certainly taken into account here, and you have to have good reflexes to catch some of these guys. To be honest though, they're really not enemies. Like, they're kind of item boxes that are also kind of obstacles. It's kind of unique in that way, but still. I just like how it's different from the rest of the series. Let's move on. Oh yeah, no analysis for this era. Bring back Era, Nintendo. I dare you. Okay, now let's go on to the DS era. Kirby Squeak Squad. Not much here either, sort of similar to Amazing Mirror, except for the fact that it's not as weird. A trend I notice is the fact that with each game, the King Dedede boss fights seem to happen earlier and earlier. In fact, in this game, he's the very first boss you fight, which is actually really weird. We've also got Kracko in this game, which is a really odd design for some reason. He's now just a mechanical cloud thing controlled by, I don't even know what that is. The bosses use enemies in the sense that you need a certain copy ability to beat them efficiently. It's actually really annoying, especially for Kracko. That one sucked. As for regular enemies, they're kind of animal themed here because, you know, Squeak Squad. I mean, the main villains are literally mice. So yeah, I mean, you kind of expect that. There are also a few gimmick enemies with copy abilities that never return, like the ghost ability, which I was really excited to use, but it was really lame. It just lets you control enemies, but like, it's not really that great. I'd like to see this come back and have it be more fleshed out. There's also a metal copy ability given by Medallion, and the copy ability sucks. A lot of enemies that appeared in Amazing Mirror make their last appearances here though, because they're using the same art style as that one. It is the great filter for Kirby enemies. It is horrific. I'd be more sad honestly, but most of them weren't memorable anyway, so why should I care? Honestly, why should I care? Speaking of unmemorable things, Dark Nebula. The theme for this boss fight absolutely slaps. One of the best boss songs in the series. Other than that, the fight sucks. I used to like him a lot for some reason, but in retrospect, he's easily the worst boss in the series. He has some alright lore, the lore being that he's the last of an extinct species of dark matter, but it's just such a lame fight. Apparently the species he was a part of was one of the weaker variants of dark matter anyway, so why make him a final boss? Dark the Roach was a much better villain in my opinion. In fact, the Squeak Squad in general would have been better villains. This is sort of the era where Kirby games started to flesh out their villains a little more, and I kinda like it here. It's not done super well here, but you know, it's a start, so I'll give him credit for that. This seems really negative by the way, but I love this game, just so you guys know. One of my favorite Kirby games actually, top 5 easily. If you want to go to my favorite Kirby game though, let's go on to the next one, which is Kirby Superstar Ultra. This game has the best utilization of enemies so far in this video, and I say that for one reason. You can now fully play as enemies for the very first time, not including the stupid ghost thing last game. That sucked. I mean, it's only a small boss gauntlet campaign, but this was groundbreaking for the time. Plus, the enemies you play as have different behaviors from the regular Kirby copy abilities. This game also brought back a few old enemies too, like Flotzo, who hasn't been here since Tilt and Tumble. I mean, I don't really think anybody asked for this, but it's cool, I guess. Lots of older Game Boy Era enemies are brought back here actually, it's really cool. The real MVP of this game though, would be the bosses. Mask Dedede, who is absolutely amazing, Kabula, who is brought back from Adventure, and Mark Soul, baby! The best boss in the franchise so far. You know what? No, I take it back because Galactonite is in this game and he's amazing too. Honestly, it's one of the best fights in the series and won't be topped for a while, if ever. This game did so much for the franchise and Kirby enemies as a whole, it's great. It acts as sort of a final goodbye for some of the older forgotten enemies. They got one more chance in the spotlight before never appearing again. It sort of feels like the end of an era actually, and the next game only solidifies that. That spin-off game being Kirby Mass Attack. This is what I call a Kirby enemy massacre. I mean, Kirby graveyard, it's not that brutal. In my research for this video, I noticed a lot of older enemies make their final appearances in this game, whether it be small cameos or actual roles within the game. And over here, there are an abundant amount of enemies. In comparison to this game, Superstar is a memorial because man, HAL was indiscriminate with how many guys he just got rid of. It also has a plethora of enemies that straight up never come back ever, and probably never will, given the fact that they were only made to accommodate the game's gameplay. That's just a fancy way to call them gimmick enemies. I mean, the gameplay in this game affects enemies' behavior a lot. Given the fact that you're not directly controlling Kirby, they have some attacks that target multiple areas. They're much less prevalent, but when they appear, they certainly appear alright. A lot of them can also be really tanky, and they're way bigger threats than they are in other games. I mean, tell me why Kirby is struggling to kill this Waddle Dee. Even if your powers have been stripped, there's no excuse for this, Kirby. You're just not doing a good job. Same with the bosses too, it feels like they have a ton of HP. Due to the new gimmick of controlling up to 10 Kirbys, the attacks and boss patterns also take that into account. All the bosses are designed with this in mind, with forcing you to use your army in some sort of way. There are only 4 bosses though, but at least King Dedede is one of them. Deroach also makes his last major appearance here, not as an enemy though, but as a friend this time. Good character development. That's some pretty cool stuff, you know? It's nice having friends. I couldn't relate. Anyway, to distract from my crippling loneliness, let's talk about the minigames, because there's something else. We have this pinball minigame which is really similar to Pinball Land in enemy behavior. The bosses here are awesome as well, 9 out of 10. Kirby Quest is a pseudo RPG minigame, and a ton of never before seen enemies make cameos in this game, including some guys from the Kirby anime, which still haunts my dreams today. Oh yeah, and the version of Dark Matter from Kirby's Adventure 2 makes a cameo as the final boss here. Given the fact that the game's turn-based, their behaviors are nothing to note, but I like their animations a lot. 8 out of 10. Strato Patrol is the last one, and it's certainly the most unique. It's a top-down shooter, and the enemies behave as such. The enemies dish a lot more at you, and you're expected to dodge everything quickly. Most of the enemies here are also flying enemies you'd normally see, and Nightmare is the final boss, so that's great. 6 out of 10. I like the enemies, but not really the gameplay. To be honest though, Mass Attack in general has a lot, and I could make my own video on it. It's that insane. Hopefully this is the longest segment in the video, because I want this game to be under an hour, so let's move on to the last game of the DS era. This is the oddest game in terms of enemy behavior, given the fact that the playstyle is so different. Despite this though, some of the regular enemies behave exactly the same. They don't even try to put on the performance for us. Waddle Dees and Bronto Birds come to mind when I say this. Step up your game. Given the fact that this is a spin-off with a completely different playstyle, there are going to be a ton of random enemies that never appear again after this. I'm actually surprised they don't appear in the sequel with similar gameplay. Really though, the regular enemies in this game are less obstacles and just more things to kill. They may inconvenience you occasionally, but they're nothing. It's the new enemies you have to worry about, since they're specifically designed for this game. Actually, no, I take it back, they're hardly even utilized. The bosses are barely anything to note either. The King Dedede boss fight is basically just Gourmet Race, but worse. And the fight with the paint roller dude is just you connecting dots before time runs out. The final boss is also really simple too, but people love her design. That's including me, again. I like how many parallels they draw between Dark Matter and a lot of these spin-offs. Her lore is also insane, and a lot of people regard her as one of the most important Kirby villains. I'd watch this video if I were you, because I'm not trying to have a 30-minute segment in the middle of my Kirby enemy video. I'm not doing that, okay? I am tired. I need sleep. Let's move on. This era is so weird. It marks the end of a period, the end of a time where random obscure enemies would pop out of nowhere and then just go away. This is an era of gimmicks, and the new enemies are designed for that in mind. But as a result, a lot of them are just really unnoteworthy. And despite that though, we also got one of the biggest leap forwards in being able to play as enemies. It feels like the end of a lot of things, but also a new beginning. But let's move on to the Wii. Kirby's Return to Dreamland. Now just look at that title for a second. Tell me you don't expect some good old classic Kirby enemies to come back. We also get an abundant amount of new enemies that never return again either, except for in the remake, but we'll talk about that later. Just like the DS era, these enemies never return again despite being introduced. It did bring back some Dreamland 3 exclusive enemies though, so that's cool. The Wap Pod. I don't even know what that's supposed to be. I'm not gonna lie, I'm not a big fan of the designs for the new enemies. I mean, some of them are great, but a lot of them don't feel like they belong in the Kirby universe. Like Bobby, for example. What the hell is this thing? If I'm being honest though, it feels like this game set up a few recurring enemies and just gonna set the stage for the rest of the 3D games, introducing a ton of enemies that will never come back and sticking with a few and bringing them back. I call this the Dreamland 3 strategy. The bosses are also a big step up from anything before it, mainly due to the new visuals, which makes everything feel more alive. It's not the first time these games have been in 3D, but it really set the stage for how they behave in the future. Wispy's fight in this game is basically how it's done in most of the other games after, but there's some exceptions to this. Magolor is also pretty good, but I don't know. I'm gonna get hate for this, but I think he's one of the weaker villains. No, fight-wise, design-wise, story-wise. He's not bad at all. I just think he could have been done better. I can't say Marx had a better story than Magolor, but his design and fight totally makes up for it. I can't really say the same for Magolor, but they did bring back the tradition of having extended versions of the final boss in the boss rush mode, and that's going to be a trend as the games continue. Trust me, it gets really depressing. In hindsight, it's easy to say this game wasn't really that creative, but if I'm being honest, this game did a lot. Even if most of them were abandoned, the game kind of modernized their behaviors in future games, and I can certainly respect that. On to the spin-offs, or spin-off. Okay, so we got another spin-off here. As is usual for this time period, a lot of enemies that will literally never be used again. I mean, it's a spin-off, what can you expect? The ones that aren't new pretty much act the same anyway. The only difference being that they're made of yarn. Fantastic. Their designs aren't all that great either. There's only so much you can do with yarn. I mean, come on. I hardly remember a single enemy from this game, so it's pretty telling how prevalent they are. I do remember the bosses though, and they're pretty great design-wise. They're really easy though, like easier than the average Kirby game. But I don't come to Kirby for difficulty anyway, so who cares? It's a literal baby game. Since there are no copy abilities yet, you're forced to wait for times to attack, kind of like the good old days. Oh yeah, King Dedede is a boss here. I forgot to mention that last game, they didn't have a boss fight for him. Nowadays, it feels more like a thing that happens occasionally, rather than the guarantee for every single game. Dreamland has fallen. Millions must inhale. What a stupid joke. Why'd I make that joke? That's the most unfunny thing I've ever said in my life. The final boss is really creative though. Again, not hard, but it's a fun fight. One of the more unique fights in the series, especially since, you know, no copy abilities. I won't spend too much time on this game because honestly, it's forgettable. I know it's beloved by like everybody in the fan base, but I just can't find a place in my heart to like it. I'm sorry. Let's just move on to the analysis before this angry mob gets to me. This era feels like a return to form in a way, with Return to Dreamland bringing back a lot of enemies we missed in the series, even if it was only for a brief few moments. Kirby's 20th anniversary also reminded us of the enemies long gone. Kirby was starting to become more accessible than ever, and it really affected the enemies in the process. It wasn't enough to bring back a lot of the older ones, but at least we were reminded that they even existed. And this will only become more prevalent as the series goes on, because the next era is very proud of its history. That era is... This game is the magnum opus for Kirby enemies in my opinion. First off, the new keychain collectibles allow for previously forgotten enemies to make small cameos. Secondly, we get new copy abilities and new enemies in this game, and they're great. It also introduces some mainstays they actually thought were regulars in the series, like Mamonti and Beatley. There are also some new enemy variants that don't come back in mainline games either, like Waddle Dee Train and Waddle Dee Fortress. Very creative. I'm not being sarcastic, I love those. It feels like a breath of fresh air, a golden age for Kirby enemies if you will. But let's not forget bosses either, because oh my god, the bosses. Especially the use of backgrounds in 3D here. It's so well used in the game. Every boss in the game uses the background to its advantage. King Dedede isn't a boss though, so, you know, we could have something better. Actually, we do have something better, because Shadow Dedede is an amazing and kinda difficult fight. I mean, it's a Kirby game, what do you expect? It's kinda difficult for a Kirby game. Even better is Dark Meta Knight's Revenge. We finally get to see him after Amazing Mirror, and let me tell you, it's one of the best fights in the series so far. But what's even better is Queen Tectonia. Not even as a fight, but as the story in general. It's really sad, and so far, it's the most fleshed out villain we've had in a long time in terms of backstory. I feel so bad for Taranza. If you know, you know. I notice that Kirby games now are more so letting and giving their villains these tragic backstories. If you want the backstory in short, Queen Tectonia was once good, and Taranza was by her side, but then she became bad and evil, corrupted by the power of the dimensional mirror. There's a bit more to it though, but you know, I'm trying to keep this video under an hour, so yeah. If you want to look for yourself, beware, it's kinda depressing, but it's awesome. Oh yeah, still on the subject of Sectonia, we get Soul Sectonia here, which isn't surprising. These harder variations of the final boss will keep appearing as the games continue. Almost forgot to mention King Dedede has his own campaign here. At this point, King Dedede sort of stopped being a villain and became a sort of anti-hero. Kinda a bad guy, but he helps us out most of the time. Kirby and King Dedede always had a weird relationship, but they're more acquaintances than anything. The same can be said for Meta Knight, especially in the next game. The next game being one of the best Kirby games in my opinion, and this game went crazy with the enemies too. First of all, it brought back a few enemies from Triple Deluxe, but it makes sense, they're the same engine after all. They also didn't add a lot of new enemies, but they used a lot of old ones too in a unique way. The game has such a distinct style and the areas are always really populated with enemies, especially compared to the other games. More so in the factory and city levels. This is even more true in areas where Kirby has his armor. I mean, he's basically invincible, might as well just throw everything at him. We mainly get stylized variations of existing enemies meant to fit the game's aesthetic. They do this with bosses too. Wispy Woods is now Clanky Woods. You can tell they put a lot of effort into this. Also, just like Triple Deluxe, this game uses 3D to an even greater extent. The Wispy Woods fight is sort of reminiscent of his fight in 64 with the looping path. In terms of bosses in general, I'm just gonna say it now, it's the best in the series. There are too many for me to list off here, but some of my favorites would be the robotic versions of existing bosses in other games. Mecha Knight is awesome though, and the hologram boss that pays homage to older bosses in the series is great too. Galactic Knight also makes an appearance here after being gone for 8 years. The final boss is everything though. I actually haven't beaten this game sadly because my 3DS is gone, but I have to tell you the lore for this fight is fantastic. It's so dark and honestly really sad. Like last time, I won't go too much into detail, but to summarize, this dude basically believes his daughter is dead. His daughter being this girl, and he basically goes insane trying to revive her even though she never actually died. So this poor girl is watching her dad slowly delve into insanity while trying to revive someone he doesn't even know is alive. He thinks that his current daughter is just a clone, so that's why he treats her so poorly. It's really depressing, but to lighten things up, let's go into the spin-offs. Actually, no, let's not, because Stardream is in this game. How could I forget to put this in the script? Stardream bears a lot of similarity to Nova, who hasn't been a thing since Superstar Ultra. Holtman, the main antagonist of the game, thinks that Stardream will bring back his daughter. After this, Stardream basically controls Holtman and takes control of his mind, trying to eliminate all life on Popstar. This was a really big deal back in the day, and I remember a lot of people being really mad when that one YouTuber spoiled it in his thumbnail. It bears a lot of significance, and it's also just an awesome fight. Okay, now on to the spin-offs for real this time. The other Kirbys are enemies here, but Lololo and Lalala make their first appearances in a long time here. I mean, they're basically glorified stage obstacles, but beggars can't be choosers. I'm happy they're here. Oh yeah, and Gordos are also here. There's really nothing to talk about. Oh yeah, actually, Shadow Kirby makes his first appearance in the 3D era. Remember him from Amazing Mirror? I'm kind of glad he's back, actually. He's pretty cool. Kracko is here too. Pretty solid lineup right here. Bronto Birds make an appearance here, but the only thing they do is slightly cover the screen a bit. I guess Waddle Dee is here too, but he's more so helping Kirby rather than going against you. Bouncies also make small appearances here. Again, there's literally nothing to talk about here. I guess Dedede would also count, but at this point, he's not even an enemy anymore. We also got a few enemies from Triple Deluxe in this game. This game had more enemies than I thought, but it's still really boring to talk about. Let's go into the next one, please. Just lots of older enemies reappearing. Nothing here is too notable, not because it's lackluster, but come on, it's Team Kirby Clash Deluxe. Are we being serious here? As far as I know, literally none of this stuff is canon, so it's a lot less significant than any other games. Dark Transit is a thing here, so that's cool, but again, not canon, so it's less cool. Wish he wasn't stuck in this game. Kirby's Blowout Blast, a real doozy right here. Everything is fully 3D for the first time. Not pseudo 3D like Tilt and Tumble, not like Return to Dreamland, fully 3D. And they translated the enemies really well here. It feels like a classic Kirby game just in 3D. And the enemy behaviors certainly reflect that. There are no new enemies in this game. Instead, they're old enemies put in a 3D space. They also brought back some of those bug guys from Triple Deluxe. You know those guys? The spaces here are pretty tight, so enemy movements account for that. Oftentimes though, they'll just walk back and forth or just stand there. Bosses are cool too. Nothing new about their attacks and patterns, only difference is that they're tweaked for 3D. And King Dedede is finally a boss again. It's amazing. Feels like a very smooth transition to 3D, despite it never being done before fully in the series. In Kirby Battle Royale, it's just It's just other Kirbys that are enemies, nothing new. I guess this Robo-Bonkers is an enemy, but it's just a weird variation of Bonkers. I haven't even talked about Bonkers that much in this video. He's in like every single Kirby game, basically. Wispy Woods is here too, but he's not really an enemy. He's more just a prop for a certain minigame. The game does have bosses, but they're just glorified minigames against Dedede and Meta Knight. At least they're playable, so that's cool. And Dedede finally gets a boss fight again. Looks like nature is healing. Waddle Dee is here too, and it's amazing actually. I've always wanted to play as a Waddle Dee. I'm sorry if my commentary is lackluster here. These minigames are killing me. There's literally nothing to talk about. I can't help it. I'm sorry. Kirby's Extra Epic Yarn, a game so forgettable, I forgot to put it in the script. I don't even need a script for this one. This is coming all from the dome here. This game kind of sucks. No, I'm kidding, but it's still kind of lackluster. They don't really add that much new here. Well, new enemies anyway. I guess they added these devil guys for the new devilish mode, and it's actually really horrible. It's annoying. They just float above the screen and occasionally attack you. It's not even hard. It's just really annoying. There are also a few new enemies introduced in the new sub games, but they're not really that notable. Yarnmo, what an iconic enemy. So creative. I love this game so much with its 6 new enemies. Half of them have the worst designs in the series, and the other half are literally just recolored from each other. This game's so freaking creative. These spin-offs broke me, man. I'm sorry. Let's just go on to the analysis already. I'll keep it brief. Don't get me wrong, I may have been a little harsh on this era near the end, but I still love it. It's my favorite. This era feels like a return to form, probably the most consistent era in terms of enemy quality and classic cameos. Enemy behaviors and their usage also changed drastically in these games. They're used a lot less sparingly, and many new variations of existing enemies are also created. Sadly though, a lot of the newer enemies die on the system they were made on, but despite this, I can confidently say this is the golden age of Kirby enemies. Alright, now on to the Wii U. Just one game really. I've never actually played this one, but it's sort of a sequel to Canvas Curse. I'm only talking about it here because I watched like a 50 episode series on it when I was younger, so I'm kind of familiar with the game. Given the fact that they had to make enemies in an entirely new art style, they didn't add that many here because of it. The claymation art style really gives these old enemies a new sense of charm. Of course, there are the usual gimmick enemies that only really fit the game's playstyle, but that's about it. The new ones that are here are genuinely forgettable and don't look like they fit in the Kirby universe. Not even the bosses are really anything to note. From what I've seen and heard from people who actually played the game, the final boss is one of the most disappointing in the entire franchise. There's a little debate that Dark Crafter, the final boss of the game, is a form of dark matter, but I really doubt it. Unlike Drossia, people really don't care enough about this villain to like actually try to analyze him. So yeah, he's kind of forgotten. I mean, look at him. I don't blame them for not caring. Oh yeah, no analysis for this one. Good looking game though. Disappointing in the enemies and bosses, but the visuals make up for it immensely. Now on to the final era, the Switch era. We're in the home stretch, boys. An absolute enemy goldmine here. Say what you want about this game, but it has so much respect for its enemies. I mean, you can befriend up to 3 of them at once and even play a campaign as them. With the added amount of players also comes an added amount of enemies, and enemies are abundant in this game. They might as well throw them at you. Despite this in the regular campaign, not much has changed compared to the 3DS ones. I guess Star Allies did get rid of a few 3DS enemies, so that sucks. It did add some new stuff, and they're really beefy given the new emphasis on multiple people. Han Jr. and Khan Jr. also make an appearance for the first time in ages. The reason why I specify the junior versions and not actual Pan and Khan is because these guys didn't even get a cameo in the anime. They give those out to everybody. I bet you didn't even remember they existed. Oh yeah, bosses also account for multiple players too. Attacks are abundant here. It will basically cover the screen. And we again get a Dedede fight too and a Meta Knight fight. It's amazing. We also get a new Wispy Woods variant, Yiggy Woods, and I really like his design. Void Termina is a good final boss, and I especially like his gameplay. But Void's Soul especially stands out to me. I won't spoil anything here, but the lore is actually wild. Even if I did talk about it, it'd take like a while for me to explain it. It's crazy. And as for the gameplay, it's easily the hardest Kirby has ever been. It's still Kirby though, so it's like baby's first bullet hell. But come on. Even the fact that you can play as previous enemies is amazing, even if it's not canon. Like playing as Marks is one of the best things ever. And Adeline finally makes an appearance after being gone for a while too. Overall, an amazing time for Kirby enemies. Well, never mind. You know what's even more amazing? Galactonite comes back in this game and he's Morpho Knight apparently. Yeah, I have no idea what's going on here, but it looks really cool. I'm just glad he's back. Amazing design, amazing fight. This game has so many great bosses. Apparently this caused a whole theory that the butterfly in Kirby that's like in all the intros is like one of the strongest characters in the entire series. That's not a joke either. People genuinely speculate if this butterfly is like a god or something. It's crazy. Anyway, I know I said to stop at Star Allies, but in my research, I found something really interesting. I want to share it with you guys. Let's go into the last game, for real this time. I'm going to make this very quick. Again, this is from the Dome, by the way. No script for this. In my research, I found that the new remake of Kirby's Return to Dreamland actually has a lot of new enemies that are like exclusive to that game. I wasn't going to touch it, but there are like a lot of new enemies here, and I kind of wanted to talk about it. I've hardly seen any gameplay for this game, so that's kind of my bad, but I just thought it was interesting. I also really don't like King Dedede's new design. That's all I have to say. Let's go into the analysis now. What a journey, man. From 1992 to 2024, we've seen everything. Kirby enemies have honestly stayed really consistent throughout the years. Yeah, I know, kind of anticlimactic, but it's the truth. Was it all for nothing? I don't know. I just like making the video. We've gone through a lot of different styles and systems, yet things sort of remain consistent. You can notice patterns in certain areas, but generally, things wrap around and go back to the status quo. In the end, you know what this video taught me? To never make a video like this again. Bye.